Images are tough to wrap our minds around, though, I will say. When we talk about images, we can be talking about a photograph of someone. We can be talking about a painting or portrait of someone. Walter can take a photograph of someone and paint that person on a canvas. An image can be the way we think about someone, our image of that person. It can be a replica of someone, like when we say about a parent and child, this little one is a spitting image of you. Although I don't know where the word spitting came from, but that's for another day. Sometimes we use words to describe someone, which is another form of trying to get at their image. We might use words like tall, short, average height, smart, brilliant, average intelligence, awkward, smooth, fast talking, mysterious, open like a book. Not only is it confusing to think about images, it has also been illegal at different times in history to create in any fashion an image of God or even an image of Jesus or the saints. The Christian church has been quite adamant over the centuries that there should be no idols. So what's the difference between an idol and an image of God? Idolatry was thought to be a threat against God's uniqueness. And of course, the worry was that the idol or the image would be worshiped instead of the actual being. The use of images in worship was one of the reasons for the Protestant Reformation, which, remember, was a protest, which is where the word Protestant comes from. The Reformers adhered to scriptural literalism around the command to have no other gods before me. And yet today, you can walk into many Presbyterian churches and see images in the stained glass windows or on paintings in various hallways. Our windows have flowers and things, but many stained glass windows have scenes from the Bible of images. The history makes even more curious the idea of humanity being made in God's image. What on earth does that mean? How does humanity being made in God's image then lead to God giving humanity dominion over the earth and then instructions to subdue it? I sure hope you came with some answers today, because I'm afraid I have mostly questions. Before we dive into our scripture text for today, I want to do a quick review from the past couple of weeks. And if this is your first week in this series, I encourage you to go back and listen to our YouTube services for the past couple of weeks. We've learned that when God said throughout creation, "Let there be," it was an invitation for co-creation. And then God experienced a sense of delight when God saw it and said, "Wow, this is good," not knowing exactly what was going to come from the invitation, and then being delighted with it. A couple of weeks ago, we learned that the goodness God declared was not actually in the thing itself, but in the space between things, in the relationship between things. We've also learned that when God used the plural, "let us make humankind in our image," God was referring to creation itself. In the Midrash on Genesis, Rabbi Samuel B. Naaman said, "With whom did God take counsel? God took counsel with the works of each day, like a king who had a counselor without whose knowledge the king did nothing." and it was the creation that was that counselor. Once we understand that God has engaged in creation in a co-creative process, not from an authoritative place on high somewhere, we begin to create a framework for understanding the creation of humans and then the expectations, or what some would call commands given to the humans. If the earth itself and all of creation helped in the creation of humankind, then does that change how the giving of dominion to the humans is understood and enacted? According to the story, God is liberating the potential of each aspect of creation. And on the sixth day, God turns toward the earth to bring forth living creatures of all kinds. And remember, this word to bring forth is the same word used for Moses bringing forth the people out of Egypt, liberating for potential. So cattle and creeping things and wild animals of all kinds are brought forth. And once again, God is delighted and saw that it was good. And then God says, "Let us make," which is another form of the word bring forth, "humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the seas, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." Let's pause there. According to Rabbi Nahum Ward-Lev in The Liberating Path of the Hebrew Prophets, there is a midrash that understands the phrase "in the image of God" to mean that, like God, the human is empowered to speak to and ultimately relate to the created world. In other words, the human is empowered to mirror God's creative action in intimate relation to creation. God spoke the potential of creation into being. So too, humans are given the power to speak, to engage consciously in intimate relationships with the world, and thereby bring forth its potential. Like God, the human is given the power to create in partnership with the natural world. So that's one understanding of what it means to be created in the image of God. Interestingly, scholar and author Lisa Sharon Harper has a different explanation of the concept of humans being created in the image of God. She says that the Hebrew word "salem" literally means representative figure, and that when the priests were writing this story, the Israelites were in captivity in Babylon. All of the neighboring empires would have understood that the image of God exists only in the royalty of the empires, meaning the kings and the queens, who were God's representative figures and the only ones who could contain the image or likeness of God. Her claim is that when these priests wrote that God said, "Let us make humankind in our image," what they were doing was revolutionary and subversive. They were saying humans, everyone equally, are made in God's image and have God's image in them. The implication is that every human has the inherent dignity within them that we would usually bestow onto royalty. And she says this is revolutionary and subversive because it completely changes the way we treat people. It would have to change the way we categorize people, create hierarchies, the way we oppress and marginalize people, the way we ignore and then choose to only love some people. I once got into a conversation with a fairly famous black pastor on the south side of Chicago. We were at a protest together. And when I said every person is made in the image of God, he corrected me. And he said, every Christian is made in the image of God, you mean? And I had the audacity to say, you know, that kind of thinking is exactly what led to Christian and then white supremacy. At that point, Father Flager stepped in and said the three of us should go to coffee sometime. Did not think the conversation should continue as it was continuing. I'm not sure who he was more afraid for in that moment, but one of us. There are many people across denominations who believe that only Christians have been made in the image of God. You can see how problematic that has been through history to justify genocide and wars against people who are not Christian. What does it mean that humankind is made in the image of God? And why is it that religious people over the centuries have wanted to apply it to their group only and no other? Part of what has confused the whole notion of humankind being made in the image of God is the second creation story in Genesis 2, in which the humans go against God and are subsequently kicked out of the Garden of Eden and cursed forever. But interestingly, that account doesn't say that humans were created in the image of God at all. What has also been problematic all along about the notion of the image of God is that because we have no concept of God in any form, we tend to use our form, a human body, and overlay it onto God. We don't know how to describe God in other than anthropomorphic terms, so we use those terms kind of knowing that they fall far short of what and who God is. But sometimes those terms do so much harm. Many of us were taught to use the term Father for God. For people with human fathers who were abusive or absent or both, it is wholly inadequate and harmful. But even for people with very present and kind fathers, it is still wholly inadequate. God is not human and was not made in the image of humans. We've tried on so many words over the years, and our intention is simply wanting to know God intimately. We've tried God the shepherd, God the comforter, counselor, God the miracle worker. Last week I referred to God as the one who never sleeps or slumbers, which is from a psalm. Most of the words we use are human-based words. When God was referred to as spirit or wind or breath, that was a way we could understand that God is not attached to a body. God is not gendered in any way. And then when the story of Jesus was told, eventually, not right away, eventually it was told as though Jesus was actually God in the flesh, meaning God was in the body of Jesus. And that confused even more this notion of being made in the image of God. And so we began to attach a physical body to God even more. The concept of Jesus being God didn't develop until almost 200 years after his death. During his life, Jesus was referred to as a son of God. But the idea that Jesus was God in the flesh of one substance, that came along later. As with everything we've been talking about, we always have to ask the question, why does it matter? Why does it matter that humankind was made in the image of God? And why does it matter that we understand what that means? Though I find their theories very interesting, I don't agree completely with either Rabbi Ward Lev or Dr. Lisa Sharon Harper. Rabbi Ward Lev's contention that human beings made in God's image means humans have been given the ability to speak to and relate to the created world and to mirror God's co-creative action seems to be lacking in understanding of the abilities of the created world, our natural world. Trees also relate to one another, and we have now discovered that they have a whole language for how they speak to each other and care for one another. Animals do the same. When I was in Newfoundland this summer, I heard under the water whales speaking to each other. There's so much creative activity going on in the natural world that we are only just beginning to learn about. Dr. Lisa Sharon Harper's notion that royalty are bestowed with inherent dignity, and when God claimed that humankind was made in God's image, that meant every human had inherent dignity. I don't actually see how that matters. She's, of course, hoping that if we believe and understand it, it would change how we treat every human, but it doesn't. What's problematic is that it superimposes a Christian God, or at least a Jewish God, onto every person. And that's problematic in itself. So what are they really trying to get at here? They are trying to put into words something that is indescribable, but it's also something we care deeply about. One of the reasons we care so deeply about it is because of the next part of the story where humankind is given dominion. We cannot begin to understand dominion unless we are rooted in having been made in the image of God. Rabbi Ward Lev says, with this blessing, God appears to authorize human domination. However, when we read this verse in its context of God creating an intimate partnership and relationship with the world, we arrive at a very different understanding. In Genesis 1:28, those two words must be understood in the context of how God exercises dominion and subjugation in the creation story. Dominion means to be a master as God is master. Remember, this is what Ward Lev is saying. Subjugate means to make the earth your subject in the same way that God subjugated the earth. God is a benevolent and relational master and sovereign. God works co-creatively in partnership with the natural world to bring forth its potential. This same relationship now applies to human beings. He goes on to say that this unique role that humans have been given has been terribly misunderstood, and it's been used to control and destroy creation. The key for Ward Lev in all of it is mutual relationship, because there cannot be genuine relationship if one party controls the other. So mutual relationship is where he ends up. Each side free. For Dr. Lisa Sharon Harper, the word dominion has also been misunderstood by our thinking that it means we can destroy unto obliteration. She claims there are 8 different words and ways that the word dominion is used in the Hebrew Scriptures. She says the use here has the meaning to tread down. So she understands why we have misunderstood, but then goes on to say, but the image for this is that of the untamed wilderness in the very beginning of creation. She then gives an example of a tree growing out of an old abandoned house in a war zone. And she says that's what happens when humans are not there to exercise dominion. A tree grows out of a house, taming the wilderness. She sees our responsibility to steward or to maintain boundaries, to maintain the wellness of all the relationships in creation. So for her, dominion means stewardship. For her, to be made in the image of God is to be created with the capacity and call to exercise stewardship of the world, which is the wellness of all relationships. The big lie we have bought into is that some humans were created to steward and some humans were created to be stewarded. She claims that poverty and oppression are what most limit the capacity of people to exercise dominion or to steward the wellness of all relationships. There's a lot that I agree with in what they both say, and there's a lot that I find missing. Rabbi Ward-Lev has powerfully helped us understand that to say God created the world is to have to say God created co-creatively in order to bring forth or liberate the potential in all of it and between things. Dr. Lisa Sharon Harper helps us understand the goodness of the creation is the goodness of the relationships between all things. Our deepest call as human beings and our capacity is for the tending of the wellness of the relationships between all beings. What I find missing in all of it is that for both of them, humankind is still elevated above all other creation and bestowed with the unique call and capacity for stewardship, not over each other, but all of creation. They would both say only for the purpose of the wellness of relationships, but they still seem to be making the assumption that humankind is more intelligent or has more capacity to make decisions on behalf of the rest. I also don't agree with Sharon Harper's claim that stewardship is akin to taming the wilderness. I don't think that's what God was doing in creation, and I don't think that's our call either, and in fact, has resulted in disastrous consequences. When colonizers came to what they called the New World, one of the justifications for the genocide of indigenous peoples was that the indigenous groups who were here were unwilling to tame the wilderness or to subjugate the earth. So the colonizers took it upon themselves to do just that because that was their understanding of exercising dominion. Let's go back to the notion of image. If God is not in the image of humans, and we don't use anthropomorphic language or pictures to describe God, then how are we to understand the image of God? The words that keep coming to mind for me are presence, energy, potential, light burst, spirit, wind, breath, life. Many years ago, I learned about how the Quakers do discernment, this idea of sifting and sorting through of options and courses of action. At the heart of how they do discernment is the belief that there is that of God in every person. That means, in essence, that every person has wisdom. The Quakers understood this to mean wisdom from God, and it simply has to be accessed in each of us. What is remarkable about their claim is that no one person is thought to be more important than another, because this wisdom in each person, this idea that there is that of God in each person, is a great equalizer. Quakers can also get mired in theology and doctrine as much as any of the rest of us. But I do think this notion begins to get at the image of God. I don't think this makes humans any more sacred or holy than any other part of the created world, just different. And it's possible that every other part also has that of God in them. The questions for us to ponder are, how can we access the wisdom that is in us, that is in our very bodies? How can we liberate the potential co-creatively in all living things and beings? How can we care for the wellness of relationships between all things and people? That, I believe, is what it means to be made in the image of God and to have dominion. May the understanding we have today impact our celebration of World Communion Sunday. Amen.